Today, we will share those images of the future that would be attractive to thinking people. In addition, we will share with you useful knowledge that you can apply today and make your life at least a little better. Today, I would like to talk with you about those images, those meanings that we could create together with our viewers, in order to bring at least a little positivity into this world. Probably, at the present time, it's not so easy to find a person who would be completely satisfied with the whole situation, his life on the whole. But we have an amazing tool. This is our thinking, our imagination, with which we can form the images of our future. Thoughts are said to be material, and images can help us build together the future that we want. Mikhail Viktorovich, how do you see the image of the desired future in 100 years, for example?
Let's start with the fact that the future is inevitable. Since the future is inevitable, the question arises, what will it be like? Is it unambiguously predetermined? If it is predetermined, then how? Or is it ambiguously predetermined? That is it variable? And is the variant that is realized somehow conditioned by the activities of people themselves? There are different opinions on this matter. The Greeks practiced for a long time in the performing arts on the theme of the inevitability of fate. Fate has no alternatives, and the whole tragedy about King Oedipus is about the fact that he tried to run away from his fate. But anyway, what had been prophesied to him happened. Meanwhile, on another side of the world, there was and still is a saying which goes, if we don't change the direction of our movement, then we will inevitably get to where we are going. The saying suggests that a person could do something so that seemingly non-alternative future would change. One such cult tragedy is the Titanic. There are more than enough tragedies and anecdotes associated with the Titanic in culture. There is a historical fact associated with the Titanic. Its wreck, in all details, was described in the book by Morgan Robertson, The Wreck of the Titan, or Futility, 14 years before the real events. As literature, it is not a masterpiece, it is rather boring reading, which in our time is interesting only because the Titanic is described with an accuracy close to one of the variants of the projects. The plot is simple. A liner is built. It is the largest one in the world. It is the most luxurious. It has 3 small engines, opening the throttles of 3 large ones, and it has 3 propellers. On her maiden voyage on a dark April night, she crashes into an iceberg, gets a hole, and sinks. There are not enough lifeboats for everyone, and as a result, some are lucky, they are saved, and some are unlucky, they perish along with the Titan. With a different look, on the contrary, some are lucky, and perish along with the Titan, moving into eternal life. So those who survive have the chance to reconsider the past. I came across a publication in which it was reported that after the wreck of the Titan, Morgan Robertson was asked, "Why the Titan but not the Titanic?" He honestly answered that he had had a vision. He had seen a sinking liner from the stern, and its name was written on the stern. But the Titanic's stern was semicircular. Therefore the inscription was written in such a way that 2 letters remained out of sight. Therefore he honestly wrote Titan, not guessing that there were some other letters on the other side. If he had thought a little about the structure of the English language, maybe he would have guessed 100% that the name was Titanic. So we have 2 real facts. The real Titanic went out to sea, and on the night of April the 14th, 15th, collided with an iceberg and sank. And we have the plot of the story written 14 years earlier. The question arises, how to comprehend all of this? There are also several variants for comprehension. Because if we approach from the position of the new chronology of Fomenko and Nosovsky, there is an algorithm that, according to certain characteristic features, allows us to compare different historical events and different historical plots with one another, and identify similar places within them. If we proceed from this algorithm, then it is reliably known that the Titanic sank in April 1912. Morgan Robertson's story could not have been written earlier than 1912, and this is some kind of post-event nonsense. This is so if we consider according to the algorithm of Fomenko and Nosovsky. If we look at it from the position of life, then the question arises as to whether M. Robertson pulled this guess from the sky. There are many coincidences: the structure of the ship, the calendar date, the cause of the wreck. Again, the iceberg had to be in a certain position in order that the ship would collide with it, otherwise the plot crumbles. All these are coincidences. If all these are coincidences, there is no cause-effect relationship between them, well then in this case, indeed, the future is unpredictable, and the future cannot be guessed. Some were lucky, some were unlucky, and this happened for no reason. But there is another view, that Morgan Robertson read from the noosphere the algorithm of development of events, described it in his story, and after that the noosphere properly governed the fact that the White Star Line conceived a new ship, built it, called it Titanic, and sent it on her maiden voyage. Then Mother Earth placed the iceberg in the right place, and the ship and the iceberg met each other, and what happened happened. If we evaluate these events from the standpoint of the Aeschylus tradition, then fate is inevitable. Once the Titanic was predestined to be built and to sink, then so be it. If we look from a different position, if we change something, then we don't fit into the known algorithm that leads to certain events. If we don't fit into that algorithm, we either destroy that algorithm or we enter into different algorithmics, which is also governed by the noosphere, and this different algorithmics leads to different results. There is such a wonderful cartoon, Primordial Tale. The cartoon is Soviet. I recommend everyone to watch it.
Времена у нас, ох, любопытные, примитивные, первобытные, да и все у нас первобытные, неуклюжие, невоспитанные, то есть грубые, толстокожие, неполнозубые, мозоленогие, парнокопытные, эх, примитивные, ох, первобытные, но очень вкусные и аппетитные. К тому ж у нас появился новенький. Пахнет приятно. Интересно, какой он на вкус. Раз, два, три, четыре, пять. Я иду его искать. Холодно, холодно, холодно. Теплее, теплее, теплее.
У нас тут строго. Закон джунглей. Ну-ка, дай это мое. Это мое. Ты зачем берешь? Отдай. Куда ты? Сюда, это мое. Отдай. Ой, ты чего лезешь-то? Я не лезу. На, возьми. Ой, он какой смешной. Ты кто? Фантик. Фантик. Фантик, завяжи из носа бантик. Ой, я говорю, ты кто? Слон, кажется. Ой, я еще точно не знаю. Я ведь самый первый наш. Самый первый. Ишь ты, хвостун какой. Слоны такие маленькие не бывают. А какие они бывают? Ну, какие, ну, не такие, и все. Да ты новенький. А уши-то, уши-то какие. Вы хотели сказать уши? Да, я и говорю, уши. Ой, Хантик. Ой, смотри на уши-то не наступи. Ух ты, ухантик. Я слышу, кто-то тихо плачет. Неподражаемо. Смотри, как бы тебе самому не заплакать. Эй, ты что? Она просит пить. Пить! Ха-ха! Все равно эта штука никогда не вырастет. Сколько ее не поливать? Поливать. Лить на нее воду. Простите. Я сейчас. Я только за водой сбегаю. Неподражаемо. Колючку пожалел. У нас женять никого не полагается.
Теплее. Новенький, тепленький. А ведь должен быть где-то здесь. Странно.
Держись. Попался добренький дурачок. Закон джунглей.
Холодно. Теплее. Новенький, вкусненький. Новенький. И здесь его нет. Странно.
Простите, у меня колючка плачет. колючка плачет.
Теплее. Теплее, теплее. Новенький. Сладенький. Куда он подевался? Странно. Переверните. О. Переверните.
Ага. Сейчас, сейчас. Старайся, старайся. Тебе-то спасибо никто не скажет. Ой! Нет, это неподражаемо.
Опустите.
Ой, вы что? Ой.
Спасибо.
Простите, простите, у меня колючка плачет.
Теплее. 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 Эй, ты новенького не видела?
Меня нет дома.
Странно. И это и нет дома. Куда они все подевались?
Ты кто? Новенький, да? А, ты фантик. Ой, а вода зачем? А, зачем ты сказал? Зачем? Я же говорю, поливать колючку. Прости меня, Фантик, я ж не знал. Ха, это неподражаемо. Это Фантик. Он идет поливать колючку. Это Фантик. Он идет поливать колючку. Это Фантик. Он идет поливать колючку. Уродина! Ты что? Ты плачешь? Они дразнятся, вон эти макаки. Говорят, что я уродина. Ну какая же ты уродина? Ты просто красавица. Это правда, Фантик. Ты самая красивая на свете мартышка. Ой. Знаешь, зови меня просто Мартой. А? Ладно?
Тепло. 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 Теперь-то я знаю, где искать новенького. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Я иду искать совсем.
Туша-кутуша ищет фантика. Это неподражаемо.
Вот когда мой панцирь был величиной с вишневую косточку, я слышала, что плод, который принесет эта колючка, волшебный плод. Не перебивай. У того, кто съест волшебный плод, исполнится любое желание. Что тебе?
Штуша-кутуша идет.
Штуша-кутуша?
Штуша-кутуша! Штуша-кутуша!
Чего ж ты сразу не сказал?
Я и говорил, штуша-кутуша ищет фантика. Меня? А кто это такой штуша-кутуша?
Штуша-кутуша, 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 страшный зверь! Только тот от него и спасается.
Кто царапается?
И кусается.
Кто легатится, кто бодается.
Или кто улизнуть догадается? Да? А как же я?
Я говорила, загадай себе что-нибудь и съешь волшебный плод.
На, держи, фантик. Загадать желание? Пусть уши перестанут мне мешать, а то очень под ногами путаются. Неподражаемо, при чем здесь уши?
Тепло. Совсем тепло. Добрался я, наконец, до этого пухленького, мягенького, вкусненького.
Ешь скорее.
Горячо! Ух, горячо, фантик! Ой!
Это неподражаемо.
Фантик.
Вы, кажется, звали меня. Только теперь меня зовут не Фантик, а Элефант. Я вырос, и имя мое выросло.
Элефант, простите, извините. Обознатушки, перепрятушки.
А все-таки я была права. Маленьких слонов не бывает.
So the question arises, how to comprehend what this cartoon is about. In it there is a monkey, who throughout the entire development of the plot of the cartoon comments on the actions of Funtic. Funtic is the world's very first elephant. He is still small. His main problem is that when he walks he steps on his big ears, and this makes trouble for him. He is kind and he takes care of everyone. The monkey, the crocodiles that hatch from the eggs on the riverbank, and his main task is to water the prickle that grows there in the forest, and which is miraculous. But he does not know about the fact that this plant is miraculous. Funtic has no selfishness, he just wants to water the prickle so that it grows well, and that everything with it would be fine. So the monkey, commenting on his actions, constantly utters the phrase, "This is inimitable." And what is imitation? Imitation is when we try to portray something by means of ourselves. Partly we succeed, partly we sometimes fail. The monkey says that Funtic's actions are inimitable. They are not falsified. They are not replicable by her and other inhabitants of this tale. Why? Because in the world of tales there is also a noosphere. The noosphere carries certain algorithmics, and each character of the tale interacts with the noosphere and finds a place for itself within this algorithmics. And this place is determined by the organization of the psyche of each of the characters, its nraviousness, its purpose orientation. Therefore, in order to repeat the actions of Funtic, or do something analogous, one must stop being the same as before and organizationally, psychologically, become like Funtic. In this case, the actions will be inimitable, but the noosphere will treat this character differently from how it treated this character before. For this reason, the fact that Funtic is always lucky in the cartoon, and Shtusha Kutusha, who wants to eat Funtic, is always late. And when he finally reaches his objective, it turns out that the accompanying effects devalue the result achieved by Shtusha Kutusha. This is the result of the fact that Funtic has a certain organization of psyche, and he fits into certain processes in a way that no one else can fit. The noosphere supports his activities, slowing down those who want to interfere with him, and leading to him those who can help him. That is, this cartoon only looks like a tale about an invented world. In fact, this is an incredibly realistic cartoon. The realism of this cartoon and its plot are really on a very high level. The only thing that does not allow us understanding of the realism of this cartoon is the audience's own underdevelopment, their unwillingness to think, and the fact that the characters appear not in the form of people, our compatriots, contemporaries, but in the form of story characters. But the psychotypes of the characters are the psychotypes of our contemporaries. Therefore, the cartoon is extremely realistic.
But we see around us how good, kind, and bright people live in problems. And people who live the unpravious way of life still have different benefits. This is a well-known objection. What can you say about this?
The question arises, what nraviousness and purpose orientation does this expression come from? Because one of the really fundamental questions, which is not reflected either in the official public political activity or in talk shows, is the predestination of civilization as such. Questions about the meaning of life are always viewed as questions torn away from life. If we talk about the meaning of life at a table with friends, then the meaning of life is understood as something global, incomprehensible, and uncognizable. If you turn to the science fantasy novel written by the Strugatsky brothers, Monday Begins on Saturday, there the theme of the meaning of life is also played out in such a context that actually heaven knows what the characters in this novel are engaged in, and this so-called engagement may last for a long, long time. Questions about the meaning of life are not clear because the whole complex of humanities has become divorced from reality. Why? Because information and algorithmics in humanities are perceived as a subjective generated product. There is one subject, he generates this information. There is another subject, he generates other information. If information is always and everywhere subjective, then we become divorced from the world, which also contains information. And our subjective information is a more or less detailed, high-quality tracing paper. First, of creation, which is objective. That is why humanities do not perceive objective information and algorithmics that exist in creation. If information is objective, If algorithmics is an objective category of being, then we are actually faced with a simple fact. Any action, doing, requires an information algorithmic content support. For example, you have a fireplace where you want to start a fire. So, first of all, it is necessary to know where this fireplace is. After that, you need to fetch firewood, but before this, you need to know where the firewood is, i.e., all the information. It is necessary to perform a sequence of actions. Find firewood, put it in the fireplace, add some liquid, start a fire with matches or a lighter, after which the wood sets fire in the fireplace. If you don't have information, you don't know what matches are for and how to use them, the action is not realizable. We can only have a wish to start a fire and make it warm and good. This concerns every action, every doing. Speaking of informational and algorithmic content of human life, it is two-leveled. First of all, these are innate components, instincts, and unconditioned reflexes. And second of all, variable components, which are not passed from generation to generation in a ready-to-use form based on the genetic mechanism of our biological species. This is called culture. For an unknown number of centuries, the humanities have not been able to say of culture that it is all the information and algorithmics that are passed from generation to generation in a ready-to-use form, in addition to the genetic mechanism of a biological species. Culture is all information and algorithmics. If there is information and algorithmics, then this is a certain information algorithmic system. It exists objectively. By strength of the fact that it objectively exists, it is cognizable. That is, one can understand the objectives for which it works in its historically taken shape form. It can be understood that culture changes as the result of degradation of people, both biological and cultural degradation, and as the result of people somehow opening up their creative potential, realizing it, modifying culture, as a result of which culture, as an information algorithmic system, can change the direction of the global historical process and each of the regional historical processes, i.e., the history of each culturally diverse society. So the question is simple. Culture, as an informational technical system, has taken shape by our time. Russia has its own culture, there is global culture, also the multiculturalism of mankind. What does all this work for, exactly as an information algorithmic system? And here we find out a very unpleasant thing. If the culture is nullified, that is, if all information is taken away, then a person is a herd pack monkey. He has only instincts and the potential of development. There is such a direction of biology as ethology, which studies the behavior and psyche of animals. Ethologists divided all biological species into strongly equipped and weakly equipped, and traced such a pattern, which they called the high innate morality of strongly equipped species. Its essence is concluded in the fact that in intraspecific competition, strongly equipped species never use those methods of attack and defense that they use during hunting and defense against other species attacking them. Everything is limited to the demonstration of intimidating poses, frightening sounds are emitted. If it comes to a duel, then strikes inflicted are such that they obviously cannot do serious bodily harm and lower the life potential of a weaker specimen. What is more, it hardly ever ends up with a duel. The duel ends with a demonstration of a submissive pose, after which the weaker specimen recognizes the right of strength of the other, stronger specimen and leaves. This is not the case with weakly equipped species. There, the more weakly the specimen is equipped, the lower its innate morality. And everything is permissible because it cannot really kill or maim. A person, if we take away culture, is a herd pack monkey, a biologically weakly equipped species. Due precisely to this circumstance that he is a herd pack specimen, innate morality is very low. That is, in relation to another specimen of his kind, everything is permissible. And the specimen thinks like this: if I am now defeated, then at another time, when it is convenient, I can attack because I want to attack. As one of the internet memes says, the invitation to a duel is a shot in the back of the head when it is not expected. There is low innate morality in a person, because what is innate in nature is his instinct. Instincts are oriented on the reproduction of the biological species, the formation of a hierarchy of the herd pack, as a functionally purpose-oriented formation, because a person cannot survive in nature alone. We run more slowly than a cheetah. To bat at the neck of a bear, this is a problem for us, nor can we oppose a tiger. We can do all this, but only in a group. A group can ruin the mood and life of any predator. But the group also has to have its own organization. Therefore, there exists a leader with females around him. The next level below the leader, candidates for leadership, and so on, are down there. Further on, moralizers come up with a very unpleasant thing. The pose of submission that most herd pack monkeys have coincides with the pose of a female when it wants to mate with a male. Accordingly, if the head of the pack sees this pose of submission, then he can cross the line. And as a result, we get everything that happens in the criminal environment, which lives in the way the pack lives. Why? Because the algorithmics of the psyche is such, pre-assigned instinctively. Now look, the herd pack Homo sapiens monkey, possessing power of intellect, potential of development, begins to build a culture. Intersocial hierarchy is built on the basis of instincts, on the basis of innate language, of gestures, facial expressions. Therefore, if we look into each other's eyes, this is accepted behavior. But in the animal world, this is a challenge, as a result of which specimens in the animal world sort things out. So there are many things that work automatically and are not realized by us, but that stem from the fact that the Homo sapiens is a herd pack monkey, with a set of appropriate behavioral programs, instincts, and potential of development. Moving on, culture appears, an information algorithmic system. We begin to develop the technosphere and master magic. Magic is not a fairy tale, it is alternative physics. If you have mastered it, then it to you is understandable and predictable. If you have not mastered it, then you can believe that this is a fiction or a fairy tale in order to calm yourself. Or you can think about the fact that if a person has a biofield and emits oscillations, then the environment also somehow reacts to these oscillations. These oscillations can be governed quite purpose-orientedly, and the result will be predictable. The result can be very large and impressive. And when we start to create the technosphere and master science and magic, we cease to be a weakly equipped species. The 12th century. The Pope, having seen the crossbow and its possibilities, it could shoot bolts through the armor, issued a bull, according to which the crossbow was regarded as a satanic weapon, and Christian states could not use it in wars with one another. But it could be used in wars against the Gentiles, that is, against Muslims, the Orthodox. Why not? What is a crossbow now? This is a toy, and a weapon of special forces used in some narrowly specialized operations when firearms are not optimal or impossible to use for some reason. What kind of weapons do we have now? Well, at the least, this is the M6 rifle, the AK-47, and their subsequent modifications. There are so many nuclear weapons now that we can detonate everything without any missiles, and the radiation after the explosion would be able to destroy the entire global civilization. And this so-called progress is going on. It is possible that the asteroid belt in the solar system is the result of the fact that there was also once a civilization, which, in intraspecific competition, went very far in scientific technological progress, but in its deep psychological essence remained a herd pack. Therefore, when Einstein was asked about what kind of weapon would be used in the Third World War, his answer was correct. I don't know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. In the best case scenario, for the simple reason that the next civilization may be actually non-human. If humanity destroys the current biosphere so that the monkey of the Homo sapiens species will not have an ecological niche there. Therefore, if we talk about trends and the automatic realization of the future, that is, the future which comes to be in the condition that we continue to behave the way we behave, then there are no prospects at all, besides the self-destruction of civilization. The question is only in the menu of self-liquidation. The menu is simple: a world war, a technogenic disaster like Chernobyl, only on a larger scale, with the destruction of the current biosphere as a result of the development of an ecological crisis, and there will be no place for man in the new biosphere, as some kind of pandemic, that is, a massive epidemic, will mow down 90 to 95% of the current population, as a result of which those who remain will have to build civilization from scratch. And the only question is whether they will go along this path or along some other path. Moreover, the question of a pandemic is really relevant, because such problems as mass oncology, mass diabetes, mellitus, and many other things are happening on a mass scale, and are not solved by the methods of pharmacology and surgery. Solving such problems requires a change in lifestyle, life arrangement. In order to change the way of life, a different worldview, different nraviousness, different culture of senses, different culture of mental activity are necessary. That is, if we get out of the matrix set by Aeschylus, then we should think about the possibilities of overcoming the crisis of civilization of the monkey with an atomic bomb or something even worse. In this case, the question again arises: what do we actually have in our psyche? What do we have in culture? Yes, we have many cultures, but again, if information and algorithmics are understood in terms of objective categories of being, then the typology of cultures can be built on just 3 attributes. So borscht, plov, this is just a kind of shell of something, but this is not a characteristic of the culture. But then a shell of what? What characterizes culture? Culture is characterized by a few things. If culture is an information algorithmic system, then in any algorithm you can see what is called in life an attitude, and in mathematics, relation. That is, one information module, another information module, how this relates and what actions follow next. The first characteristic attribute, this is the attitude of culture towards the creative potential of the individual. There are many variants. To trample on everyone, in this case the whole society is in the position of Winnie the Pooh, who goes to the owl for consulting services. The owl knows everything, as he thinks, and he teaches Winnie the Pooh wisdom, what to do and how to be. In some cases, the donkey provides Pooh with alternative consulting services, but in general, Winnie the Pooh lives as an object of manipulation. His own manifestations are only within the limits of what someone else has already loaded into it. The second variant, the majority is in the position of Winnie the Pooh. A certain minority is in the position of the owl, and maybe a competing office appears that competes with the owl for control over Winnie the Pooh, and they will somehow compete among themselves. Another variant. This is reflected in our Russian culture. There is such a Soviet movie, an unfinished piece for mechanical piano. There is a catchphrase where a serf peasant is sitting at a piano and pretends to be playing the keys. And since the piano is mechanical, it plays by itself, and the serf peasant is simply sitting there. This surprises one of the aristocrats, and then comes the phrase, "I told you, the grimy one can't do it." Yes, the grimy one cannot, because he was raised grimy. The next variant. Everyone's creativity is the property of everyone in society. The suppression of any creativity is a crime against society analogous to treason. And then interesting things are revealed about the fact that Joseph Vissarionovich Stalin was not an evil tyrant, but an educator, howbeit through rather strict methods. Because if you read Economic Problems of Socialism in the USSR, then the task was that every person had to be a creator of social development, that is, the creative potential of each and every one. Well, there may be an objection saying that there is no fundamental difference between Stalin and Hitler, because Hitler wrote about the same thing in Mein Kampf, that every German should have the opportunity to receive the education that he can master. There is a difference, however, because Hitler said that he freed the Germans from the chimera of Sovest, while Stalin regularly mentioned Sovest and God in his speeches. Such references could be perceived as figures of speech, such as God helps the Bolsheviks. But practice is the criteria of truth. We defeated Hitlerism also because God helped the Bolsheviks. The second characteristic attribute of culture is the attitude towards Sovest and shame. We live in a culture in which Sovest and shame are suppressed in the family. If the family does not succeed in the task of suppressing Sovest and shame, then the school by the third grade in most cases successfully solves this task. But shame and Sovest are the objective delimiters of dobro and evil. Because if you turn to what was written about shame and Sovest before 1917 in Russia, then shame and Sovest are interpreted in those written sources as innate religious feelings, which, outside of confessional beliefs, connect a person directly with God. The difference between shame and Sovest is that Sovest acts preemptively, before events, and shame acts when we have already ignored the voice of Sovest. It was sleeping or was suppressed, then we feel ashamed. What distinguishes shame and Sovest from all the other inner voices is that it's impossible to bargain with shame and Sovest on any conditions. That is, if you want to do something wrong, unpravious, then you can suppress your Sovest, but you will never convince it in the praviousness of what is in essence unpravious. This is not the case. And the third characteristic attribute is willpower. Willpower is the ability of an individual to subordinate himself and the course of events around him to the realized by him purpose orientation. In most cases, willpower is not manifested in the fact that a person is doing something very persistently, and it's impossible to interrupt him in this. This is actually how obsession, possession, manifests itself. It is when a person is not a master of his own self and is carried forward in life by a certain force. And again we return to Hitler. There is a film by Leni Riefenstahl. She is a genius of documentary filmmaking, but life turned out in such a way that her creativity flourished in the era of the Third Reich. She made two films, one called Olympia, which is considered to be one of the best films of all times and peoples, and is about the Olympics on the theme of sports, and another film called Triumph of the Will, which is banned in most countries of the world. It is a documentary about the Congress of the Nazi Party. Find this documentary on the internet, watch it, and decide for yourselves that the name should not be Triumph of the Will, but the apotheosis of absence of willpower. And everything will fall into its place in your mind. They ceased to be human beings because they refused their willpower. And a human is a willpower that realizes the creative potential under the dictatorship of Sovest. And if we say that a person is a willpower that realizes his creative potential under the dictatorship of Sovest, and everything else is oppression and perversion of the true human nature, then we face the prospects for an alternative, bright, joyful future, in which there are no hungry people, no people deprived of the opportunity to open their genetically determined potential. We'll build a society in which there are no hungry, no disadvantaged, in which there are no social conflicts, because they cannot exist, since all are reasoning people who have Sovest that coordinates the actions of different people in such a way that they support each other and supplement each other. They do not destroy, and they do not try to destroy what has been done by one person alone. In this case, we really face the prospects for a bright future, which, however, no one can shape alone. Creating, this is for everyone. Here is the main point of our conversation outlined.
Everything is clear and explained in detail. If I understand correctly, you are saying, people, let's live according to Sovest first of all. And then Sovest, with the help of willpower, will help to open a person's creative potential.
On the contrary, first find your creative potential.
What is creative potential then? How to find it?
This is peculiar, unique. Everyone has their own predestination. One simply needs to do their job according to Sovest. So, if you are a mechanic, for example, tighten all the nuts and add brake fluid so as not to have to send an SMS later. Ivan, if you are still alive, stop the car and tighten the wheel nuts because I forgot to do it. So you just need to do your job according to Sovest. Then, something besides your work will open up for you. But when the creative potential is mastered, the question always arises as to whether it is dobro or evil. Then the question arises of where then is my Sovest and my shame. Further, if you have an idea to realize, then you need to start doing it, which requires willpower. That is, the sequence is exactly what I said. Creative potential, Sovest, willpower. A person can wake up because his Sovest has awakened. But this can happen when the creative potential has already been somehow mastered before. And in the algorithmics of development, it unconsciously, but nevertheless came up with a need in Sovest. And then the question arises, there is Sovest, the creative potential has given out something, Sovest has approved it or ordered its modification so that it be dobro. What's next? Society is that which psychodynamics it has. And the question comes up, am I like everyone else? Or am I cut from the right spiritual cloth so that even one is a warrior on the battlefield? Well, even one is a warrior on the battlefield means different things. In some situations, it means sacrifice and throwing oneself on an embrasure. In some situations, it means to lead the escape from the battlefield, as Suvorov did during the Battle of the Trebia. One of the regiments was escaping from the battlefield. When he was reported to about this, he hopped on a horse and rode to the position of the escaping regiment. When he saw it, he began shouting, well done, keep luring them, don't lag behind." Then he ordered, "Halt!" When the rows were leveled, "Around, attack, hurrah!" But when it is long-term work, an educational enlightenment mission for children, for friends, for everyone who is ready to listen, who has an interest, one should act in a different way. And to someone who has no interest, one has to say something like, "Mark my words when trouble knocks on your door."
Do I understand it correctly that Sovest comes in the form of mental images, and every person has thoughts constantly and non-stop? And it is sometimes very difficult to distinguish the voice of Sovest in this mental chaos.
Sovest is a call, a voice that either obliges one to do something in spite of one's own egoism, or prohibits one from doing something like everyone else does it, or in the interest of one's own egoism, which is destructive in relation to nature and society. Sovest is like a traffic light on the road, either red or green. like a turnout, a railroad switch, either here, dobro, or there, evil. If one delves into oneself and thinks, then one will see that Sovest is different. It stands out among the whole multitude of inner voices. It differs from everything else in that it's impossible to bargain with it. If one comes up with a dilemma, which way to choose as one thinks both are good, then the question will always be which one of these variants is better. If one's Sovest is asleep, it's not excluded that when Sovest wakes up, it will say, both are bad, think.
And in order to distinguish, check these variants. Is it possible to establish such a rule for yourself? Not to wish for another what you do not wish for yourself.
No, this cannot serve as a verification, because if the initial unambiguousness is perverted, then you will not wish dobro for another person, because from your point of view, it would be evil if it were turned against you as well. You need to distinguish in concretics. Sovest is distinguishable from other inner voices, but it's always concrete. It's not like when installing a software package, one has to put a tick in the boxes where one needs it. It is always specific, concrete. If you ignore and go wrong, then you will be ashamed. And you will understand that then, at that time, you heard the voice of Sovest, but now shame. Shame may be so unbearable that people commit suicide even in cultures where suicide is viewed as a mortal sin, for which there can be no forgiveness. Suicide is bad, but shame helps you to understand what Sovest is. Therefore, excuses on the theme, I do not know what shame and Sovest are, come from the unpraviousness of a person, and this is a big problem for an individual who takes such a position.
Then the question arises about willpower. How to develop willpower?
There is no need to develop it. There are situations in life. For example, a tradition obliges you to raise a glass of wine. If you have an understanding that there are no life-giving doses of alcohol, then you can say to yourself, stop. You can find forms of explanation to those around you that will not be perceived by them as offensive. Willpower, in most cases in society, manifests itself when a person can say stop to himself and not do something that should not be done. In order to come to a bright, beautiful future, you first need to start moving. I believe that these three typological attributes of culture are understandable: creative potential, Sovest and shame, and willpower. You need to find in yourself where these are and begin. And then everything will go by itself, because the monkey in the cartoon Primordial Tale is right in saying, this is inimitable. And if you begin, then the noosphere and the Almighty will support you.